Hello, my loves.
Hey, everyone.
Welcome, welcome. I was saying to Michael, every time we start this show or I start a group, my first thing I always do is I go, so much energy going on. It takes a lot just to even get to this show. And welcome, you guys, for being here. Today, we're going to talk about endings and brand new beginnings. This is Living Your Awakening, a show where we offer you all conversations and tools to help you follow your truth, live your heart, and embody your awakening. And I'm Gem Rose.
Hi, I'm Michael Anderson. And if you want to participate today, we're streaming on Amajam's YouTube channel, but we can't read the comments. So if you actually want to participate, ask questions, give your comments, go to Living Your Awakening and sign up for this show. You can do that really quickly. Just first name, last name, email address, and it sends you to a Zoom link. So that's how we're interacting still. So we'd love to have you participate. So please do so. We're going to be taking questions and comments throughout. So if you want to leave a comment or a question, you can use the Q&A for that. If you have a question, put a Q in front of it, big capital Q. That helps us just identify it. If you want to raise your hand on the phone, you can hit *9 and we'll see it. Also, you can just raise your hand in the software. So feel free to do so. All right.
Hi, Barbie. She says, hello, y'all. Blessings from Arizona. Thank you for being here, you guys. So when we were tuning in to the topic for what we want to talk about, there was such a spirit was showing me this image of we're like walking away from everything we've known and leaving it behind. And of course, they show me in this loving way, right? And from their perspective, we're like completely non-attached. It's like we're like coming out of a chrysalis or an egg or just 1,000 gazillion lifetimes. And behind us is this wake or this, like when a bride gets, she has that veil, right? Or the train in her dress. The thing that's different about this time, because we've left stuff behind before, right? We've changed before, blah, blah, blah. But the depth of it and the energetics of it are completely different, something that we have never experienced, how I see it in any of our lifetimes or as a soul. And we are moving into living from inner freedom, from the truth of who we are in a way that we just never have before. And so the mind, holy shit, right? The mind cannot follow this process or quote this progress, could use that word, on such a deeper level more than before, because the mind is so used to leaning on or kind of going to this identity of who we are. And that's like dissipating every day. And so the mind keeps going back to be like, you know, somewhere to just be and rest and understand it. It just can't do it, because when it goes to look at something, it just keeps dissipating. And so how this feels in us, as you know, right? There's just no words to describe the depth and the intensity and the waves of feeling almost every emotion we've ever felt, and bliss and the peace and just like I don't even know who I am. Like there's nothing here. And it's happening simultaneously and all at once. And we just keep riding these waves. And so I feel like we just want to talk about this with you guys and hear your experiences and your questions. But on the other hand, it's like almost like there's nothing to say because it's kind of like we just go, yep. Like, how do you slow your words down enough to describe the gazillion things going on you right now? You know? So the one thing I want to start with is this experience within us that we can't control this. We can't understand it. And how do you navigate this new kind of, I get this image of like a manila envelope, like this manila color, like there's a color, but there's no color, right? How do you navigate this space? Besides just a lot of practice, right? And feeling like I don't even have a word for it. Feeling like your awareness is kind of over here one moment, and then over here the next moment, and then over here the next moment, and then nowhere in the next moment, and then somewhere else in the next moment is super, super normal right now. And it's just what it is. And it reminds me of this reading I did like 28 years ago. It was like my first week, I want to say, of doing sessions. And this woman was sitting in front of me and she was talking about she just wants to be free, or she just wants freedom. And her aunt, who had died, came into the session and showed me this image of a blank easel and holding all these colors with a paintbrush. And you're just about to paint, but you have no history to paint from. You have no habit to paint from. You are in a brand new, empty, present moment space, and you have nothing in you that says, oh, I've ridden this bike before and I know how to paint. You're like completely starting from this present moment without habit, without I'm this, I'm that, this is who I was, this was my childhood, this was my past life, without some sort of like path inside of you or pattern to go, oh yeah, I know what colors I like, I know how to paint. And she was showing me that the aunt who had died, she was showing me this image, and she said to me something I'll never forget because it's more and more true every day. She's like, you guys all think you want freedom, but you have no idea what you're asking for. Of how, because the part of us that says, I want to be free in that way has an idea of what freedom means, has an idea. And it's never that, as you know, right? It's never, ever, ever that. And so this person's aunt was pointing to the fact that our minds can't understand the level of freedom of how to create from this brand new place. And that's actually what we're entering into within us. And then the other thing I just want to add before I want to ask you what you want to say
Sure.
is, so we're not astrologers, right? But we're very sensitive to energy and what's going on and how things affect us. And today, Saturn has been in a different sign for 2.5 years. It's moving into Pisces today, and it will be in Pisces for 2.5 years. And this is such a massive transition of how this is affecting all of us, and however this is affecting you personally in your chart, of what it's highlighting right now of endings and beginnings. And we were reading this article that it said, where were you about 30 years ago? I think it was like 94, 95, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like 29.4 years ago. What was going on for you then? What significant things were happening for you? Here we are again. And for me, like when we were reading this article, I was like, all right, what was going on for me then? And I was like, holy shit, that's when my heart first opened to me. And that's when I was engaged to this person. And it was like the first time my truth came up and said, I don't want to marry this person. And then a year later, I moved to San Francisco and my gifts opened. Like, that's what was going on for me. And I'm like, ruh-roh. Like, if it's that big again, not like bad, right? But it was a major shift for me 30 years ago. It's what everything started for me. And so this Saturn energy is like, it's like this relentless father, this relentless teacher, and it wants you to walk through something very specifically, very methodically, to deeply understand, not just, mentally, it's like to know it in your being. So like a simple way I would describe Saturn is if you've never tasted an apple and it gave you an apple, it wants you to feel every ounce of this apple and how it tastes for you and what it means for you, like all the way through. And so because that energy is kicked into Pisces and it's kicked into a different sign and it's kicked in a very specific way, we're just on this tip of entering transformation in a way that we never, ever, ever, ever have before. And it's new to all of us. We're all figuring out as we take each step every day, So we'll be talking about all that, but that's what I want to start to say.
Well, for me, this energy of the shift, I'd say I for sure energetically have felt it. It's been at least a month, maybe a month and a half in specific, and I could feel the transition. It's like when you watch a lunar eclipse and you see it transitioning and you feel it transitioning. It's just that space where there's like, it's not out of what's old, what it has been, and it's not in what's new. And there's been this kind of funky period that feels like it's just been moving super, super slowly.
Like,
yeah, exactly. It's like, yeah, absolutely. So it feels like it's been moving really, really slowly. For me, I know it feels like a massive trend. I can't be specific about what was going on in my life because there were a lot of things happening 30 years ago, 29 and a half years ago. But what I'm really feeling for me specifically is I'm really finding, we talked a little about this last week, which is why I brought up for me specifically, it's like I definitely am moving into a new phase of more being, more just being, having more of a simple life, not necessarily chasing everything energetically so much, and just more just being and living. Whereas I think I've been prepping for this phase for a while. So that's what I feel for myself. So let us know what you've been feeling. If you've noticed this change, let us know in the comments. And, we'd love to hear what you have to say as well.
Yeah. And you guys can raise your hand anytime during the show, and then, we'll be speaking with you. The other thing I feel that I want to say too, that I'm getting to share, is the amount of courage it takes. I don't want to say it takes. The amount of courage you have to be in this brand new space that you've never experienced before is, I don't have another word for it besides like this spiritual courage. Like it's really, 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 really profound. And I feel from spirit that we should just, acknowledge that. Like this path is not for the faint of heart, as you know. Like Michael and I will go for a walk and we'll meet somebody and they're like, "How you doing?" I'm like, "Meh." I'm like, I don't know what to say.
It's hard to communicate.
I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah. It's been a little bit funky. I'd say this whole 23 has been kind of a wild ride, more than I really expected. I mean, we could feel the energy of 23 coming in. We talked about it, but it's been kind of really focused and really kind of scraping through. And we have been feeling, it's interesting. Was it full moon last night or is it tonight?
Today.
Okay, because we've been feeling this energy of this shift over of going into this new energy. That's the thing with astrology. I don't necessarily follow specific, but what we usually talk about, like, hey, we feel a big shift coming that feels beyond just us. And then we look to see what's going on. And if sure enough, there's an astrology thing going on. So I do feel like these things, again, is that spiritual sommelier, you have these shifts, and astrology definitely adds a flavor. You can feel the frequency difference. So there is, I would suggest that really tune into that and see how that affects you. See if you notice it. Maybe you don't notice at all. Maybe you do, and maybe you can quantify that a little bit. So you can quantify like what that feeling feels like for you. And that way, as you begin to feel these, because that's the thing, life is such, we've talked about that. And of course, life is these ebbs and these flows, and just being kind of, aware. So as things ebb and flow, you kind of know how to flow with it. So you're not resisting, because that's the thing, the resisting of it, that just creates a lot of suffering. I'm not saying it's been easy. I mean, this transition like this last month has been really it's been challenging, I mean, wouldn't you say? Just because it hasn't, it's not, nothing has quite formulated. So everything feels like it's in the mix.
I think what's challenging too is like when we get information, like for me, and I know others have gotten this information, or know some of you have too, because of what you've shared. Like, this is your year, right? Like this is like, we've been a caterpillar and it's time to be this butterfly in a whole other way. And then there's what that means. And then there's this, right? We're actually like walking through things we've just never walked through before to be this free self. And it's like, we might see it psychically, right? We might get a feeling of what it is, but then we actually have to go through the process of what that actually means. And it can feel, it can feel like, well, that's not true. This doesn't feel like my year at all, right? And it's like, actually, it is, but this path that we're on to be this next level of true self is what we're going through right now. And so it's challenging at times when you get psychic information, or you get information about what something's going to be like, and you can feel the freedom in it, or you can feel the joy in it, you can feel the heart in it. And then you actually have to walk through it, and it can feel really, really different than what your information was. And then you can go through this whole thing of like, oh, I didn't listen right, or it's the wrong information. And it's like, no, we get this information on very different levels. And then humanly, like Spirit showed me today, we were creating the show a couple of days ago, about this image of like, we're just leaving the old behind and we're coming into this brand new space. But it's how it feels for us emotionally, mentally. The physical body is going through things it's never gone through before because of this. Like, the physical body is going through a whole shift that it's never gone through before, right? So we are a human being still walking this path and feeling, because we have attachment, we have fears, we have traumas. And so it's all these things that get triggered in this process of like leaving the old behind, So it doesn't mean your information is wrong. It just means sometimes it's like the end result that we have to still walk through.
I guess what I'm prompted to talk about too is, there's a lot of activity going on in the world right now, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of activity. And the thing is that stuff still affects you on some degree, but that doesn't necessarily mean that what you're going through necessarily mirrors that. It might, but then again, it might not, because you might, with all the craziness that's happening this year out in the world, you might be going through something that's super peaceful and super beautiful and opening. And so again, don't necessarily, I guess I don't know who needs to hear this, but somebody needs to hear this. Just keep in mind that your journey is your journey, and whatever everybody else's journey or the collective journey is going through, there may be some overlap, but you might be having your own separate journey. So just honor your journey, right? As you go through your ebbs and your flows, and your sort of what's ending for you and what's opening for you, right? Because sometimes I think there's a tendency, like, I need to be in sync with whatever else is going on in the culture. And I think sometimes that happens, but I know for us that we have found that our sync is definitely not always aligned with what's happening. So I just want to say that forever needs to hear that.
Yeah. And Spirit has said for years, in private sessions and in groups of like, own where you are.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's a good reminder. The mind can get into the guilt and spiritual guilt of like, well, if somebody's suffering, I shouldn't be happy. I shouldn't be joyous. And it's like, from Spirit's perspective, it's like, but your path is your path. Somebody else's path is somebody else's path.
Yeah. Stay in your lane.
Stay in your lane. I had this image of like, stay in your lane, of like going bowling, right? And imagine if we didn't stay in our lanes, our balls would be going all over the place, right? And the whole game would be screwed. And it's like, stay in my lane, stay in my own bowling thing. What were you going to say?
No, I agree. I mean, it's a great analogy.
Yeah. Jennifer says, yes, this year I'm showing up in a completely different way. I am living from making decisions from the space of my future self instead of my usual scared and limited self. That's interesting. So, do you ask yourself in the moment, what would my future self do? Or how do you do that? I'm interested. So if you want to either write back in, or if you want to raise your hand and then we can talk about it. But that's interesting. And then Katie just said too, yes, the easel thing feels so right on. You know, it's so interesting too. When I had that image of the easel and this completely free being sitting there with it, I felt what that meant. Like, that's what's interesting. We have conversations, like there are words, but then there's what the meaning is, the feeling of it, right? And when I saw that image of just absolute present moment and freedom, where there is nothing behind me, let's say, if that was me, I have nothing in my being telling me who I am, who I was, and who I'm going to be. I am completely in the moment. Like, I really felt that. That was really like, I understand how that can be scary for the mind, but our hearts are like, yeah, it's exactly what I want, right? So I'm going to go to Jennifer and we talk about the future thing. Okay, you can talk. I mean, unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yep.
Excellent, excellent. So hello, it's so nice to speak with you guys. So what I meant was I'm making decisions from the person who I want to be, not the person who I am right now. So I'm like, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, how do you do that? What do you do?
You know, I don't know. I don't know the process exactly. This is all very new for me. I'm trying to think in different ways, in bigger ways. I'm making a lot of investments in myself, in my emotional health, in my professional life. I mean, I just signed up for a coach certification program, and I don't know. I just feel like my life is moving in it's on like a totally different trajectory this year, and so I'm really appreciating what you're saying, what you're saying right now, and it's just like reaffirming that all the things that I've been feeling, I guess, because no one else, I think, gets it like you guys do. So
that's what I was going to ask you. So you're feeling this sort of where you're going, right? It has a feeling to it, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's not like you're thinking. I mean, you might think about it, but there's a feeling. It's a vibrational spot that you're connected to. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
I think that's a super important point, because you can mentally create this whole vision of what it is, but it's mental, but you're actually feeling what's true and going towards that. And that's the same thing we've been feeling like really strongly, is I feel like my whole kind of operating, how I'm going to operate in life is really different. And it's the way that I've never really operated in my whole life. And it was right around the first of the year, right? And I was suddenly like, hey, I don't want to process so much. I want to actually be more be, because that's what I'm really wanting in my heart. I've needed to process. There's a lot of stuff I needed to heal, but there's something in me that's wanting to be. So I feel so similar to what you're talking about.
So when you make these decisions from this, like, I guess I could use a word, like you said, bigger place, or like more empowered place, or like feeling like it's already there, and all you kind of have to do is, as you keep kind of calling on it, you keep bringing it into aliveness, or like, I don't have a word for it. Like that's the image I get when you said how you're doing this, is like feeling, I guess I could say, or tapping into this bigger healed you, let's call it, right? Or the more empowered you, or the part that's like, whatever, I got this, versus mentally you can be like, oh no, right? Is it like that?
Yes, definitely. So except for the example I showed, like I said, I purchased that coach certification, which was quite an investment. And then I also invested in, right now I'm doing this 21-day journey to calm aliveness. It's a program led by a medical doctor on how to healing trauma in your body. So it's like I'm finally addressing things that I've been meaning to address for years. Like I've been meaning to work through some things in my life, some traumas. I've been meaning to be more successful in my career, and so I feel like I'm on that path now, and it's it's part terrifying and part really exciting.
Have you done anything so far to kind of because it comes up to is like kind of like a fire ceremony, some kind of ceremony to sort of celebrate what was, and kind of, to let that go, to let that I don't want to say go away, but it's just like it served its purpose. Have you done any kind of ceremony to kind of honor and kind of, send that down the river, the old part
No,
of you?
Michael, I haven't, and that's actually an excellent idea. Do you have any suggestions for like what that would look like?
Well, I think at the very least, I mean, the thing about a ceremony, I think the important thing is that the thing that you do is that you bring your awareness to and really fully acknowledge mentally and emotionally kind of where you've been, and hold some space for it. I mean, and then what that looks like, some people will write it on a piece of paper and burn it. I've tried that. I think it depends on just whatever resonates with you. I think the more important thing is to bring your consciousness to it, to so that you really feel that, like you really bring that cycle to an end. Because I think there's something about, and that's where ceremony is really, really nice. And in some cultures, they really have ceremony for ending of things, and that's something that I really enjoy. And it's something that I find that there's something really powerful about that.
Yeah, I imagine that's a really excellent idea. Thank you, Michael. I'll give that some thought, and I will do it. I think, yeah, because I do feel like my old self is not died, but it's
peeling down.
Yeah, like I'm moving on. I mean, I had a really big trauma in my early 40s, and I've been sort of stuck in this freeze mode for about 10 years. And like I'm finally getting out of it.
That's so huge, right?
Yeah, really huge.
I think that's where the astrology, because it's always churning stuff in our life. And I think that's where these waves really help, because you can really feel when you're like going on these waves, and they can really help push things up to deal with. You already have. And then also for the completion, where you can feel that completion energy when things, you can honor what was, and then begin to invite in what's new and what you're working on. Yeah.
And when you say like you were in that experience for 10 years, it's such a testament to like when something's really ready to change, it does. Right. And it's like for all of us, we can be like, God damn it, like working my ass off. Like, why isn't this changed yet? And it's like, oh man, if we could only see this larger picture in us. So I thank you for sharing that, because I think it's really important for people to hear, because now you're here after that 10 years. So versus talking to you, let's say a year ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, it's just different. Right. And so I think it's a really good reminder. And of course it's easier with 2020 hindsight, right? To be like, oh, but to walk through it, to feel stuck in it, to be in that experience, and then to feel like you're actually coming out of it. Like it's a really major thing in like self-love and self-care, and been like, wow, it's actually time now, actually ready. I don't know. I just think it's really important.
Yeah. It's worth celebrating what's worth celebrating, and then make choices about what you're doing moving forward, knowing, because you already kind of know the themes that you're going to be working on, and just really dig deep and really be clear about your commitment to doing that. That way you're clear about what you're moving into.
Yeah, definitely. My big challenge now is like, I haven't really told the important people in my life that I'm in the process of doing this. And I don't know, like, my family will still be with me, of course, but I'm kind of wondering, will my current boyfriend still be with me at the end of the evolution? Like, will I have really relationship? Or so that's something
you be you, and then that's the thing about relationships, is they either step up and match or they don't.
Yeah, it's scary.
I know that's scary, but that's really the truth, and that's kind of a beautiful thing. Like, be you, stand in you. Because if it doesn't match, let's say, I'm not saying it is or it's not, just to be clear, then, then you're going to feel that, it's going to feel heavy. It takes time. I mean, everybody has their time, and people make choices about whether they want to make that leap. I mean, in our relationship, that's a theme. Like, somebody had once described us as two logs rolling down the hill, and one log gets ahead of the other, and that's definitely.
And the other one catches up, and the other one rolls ahead, and then the other one catches up, and then the other one rolls
throughout our relationship, we've had to like ask some really fundamental questions, like, are we willing to, where she's grown or where I've grown, and I'm willing to meet that or to honor that.
It's scary.
It's scary.
And like the other thing too about that fear, I totally get that fear of like, oh, so-and-so is going to go away. My relationship is going to end. Like it's terrifying. And the other thing I want to say about that specific fear is it's a very interesting spot. Like if we just back up from that for a second and looking at it from a going forward, empowering, completely like changing your whole energy and going forward, it's a spot as you go to do that, the ego goes, oh, that's a nice spot for me to bury in. And it goes right into the, I'm going to lose so-and-so, or I can't be with him anymore. And it's a whole other layer that we don't really think about because we're just so freaking scared of losing someone or losing something or not having enough money or, it's all the survival stuff, right?
Mhm.
Relationship, home, money, job, health, right? But there's this whole other energetic levels that go on when we make forward movements like this. And the ego, just the ego all by itself, forget past lives, forget this life, forget anything, forget our trauma. The ego, it has to stay, even though it can't ever really be this, it has to stay comfortable. And so when we make these forward movement shifts, it gets really triggered and it freaks out and it will like kind of burrow in our fears. And so not only are we scared to lose these people, but then we're quadruply, doubly scared. And we don't understand, like we wouldn't say, oh, my ego is freaked out right now, right? We wouldn't catch that for ourselves all the time. You could see it in somebody else easier, right? Like, oh, your system's totally freaked out, So I just want to say that too, that we can ask when we get really scared of things, because it's really normal, right? Just the human fear of like, I don't want to lose this person, or I'm afraid to be alone, or I'm afraid what will happen. And then we can ask, okay, what percentage of this fear, because it's so strong or because it's so major, it's such a major transition in my life, what part is my ego or the ego? Or so I think it's just important of extra info to have. But I totally get that one.
Thank you. You guys are so awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, sister. Thank you for sharing. Okay. So I'm just going to read some more Q&A here. So let's see. So Katie says, what you're saying sounds so right on for me. I have clear info I'm moving and yet have no other info. So trusting the moving and aiming to be available to go and checking in occasionally to say, is that still true? 29 and a half years ago, I went to graduate school and quit the program 3 months later and moved and got a whole new job. So that astrology seems keeping with this info. Yep, that's massive. Shireen says, I'm finding I'm often having to hold space with all the energy of what I can feel is coming, while at the same time getting to be gracious. Oh, such a good word. Gracious. With the present old habitual tendencies that are coming up and seemingly flushing out of my system. That's the other thing too. It's like, even right before the show, it was like an hour ago, I was getting dinner ready and all of a sudden I was like, and I felt like, I wouldn't even know how to describe it. It felt just really normal for me. I felt like griefy, kind of like just not happy. And I was like, all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute. All I have to do is get the F out of the way and let it go. And it was just like pounds of wounding. And because of this like space that we're all in, this energy that we're going through, like there's so much more space. Get out of the way and let these like massive identities go, right? It's so, okay, I want to go to Shireen's other thing she said. And then Destiny says, I know that I am moving forward and everyone is a yes, yay. However, it feels like I am feeling like all I've been feeling is the yuck. Yep. I want to go back to that in a second.
Yeah.
Actually, okay. I just want to share my experience of that. I'm just getting to share this experience. So I used to do this healing class a long time ago. And we would have these movements, these releases, and everyone in the class would be like, oh my God, I feel so good and free. And all I felt was freaking horrible. And I'm like, what's wrong with me? Everyone seems to be having a completely different experience than me. And over time, I had, enough awareness to just not get so stuck in the yuck, but to realize what the heck is in me, that every time I have this clearing, it actually brings up this energy even more. And it just took me a long time. And even some of that kind of yuck, even though it's different than your yuck, the yuck today, of like the sadness or like this heaviness, this yuck that used to happen for me that doesn't happen anymore, it was so intense and so loud and so all-encompassing. I couldn't get free of it. I couldn't have any space with it. And it was years of like chipping away at it and meeting it and meeting it and meeting it. And then finally realizing at the end of the day, what that yuck was just a lot of trauma and wounding. At the end of the day, like years and years of being present with it. And then once I was like, okay, anything that's coming into me, into my space is attracted to this deep, deep, deep trauma that I wasn't really aware that I was that traumatized. Because I got my gifts, right? I'm psychic. I can do healing on myself. But I had no idea to the depths of this trauma that I was carrying. And once I started addressing it, the yuck started finally dissipating. And then it came up less and less, but then it would come up more and more. It's kind of like I had waves, but I knew what it was at the end of the day. So it can be really normal when a lot of people are like, oh my God, I feel so amazing. And you're like, I don't. What's wrong with me? Nothing. There is nothing wrong with you. And the other thing and I wrote about this in my last group that I did in the email, when we are going through all of this like major light coming like into the planet, into us, our light's coming out more, like, right? Everything that we've talked about, depending on each person's proclivity to and what creates this proclivity or where you would naturally lean is a lot of things, okay? So depending on each person's, how they would naturally look and be with stuff, when all this light comes through, somebody is either, I feel so much freedom, or they're totally 100% identified and are focused on the stuff the light is bringing up. And so when you've had a lot of trauma or a lot of depression or a lot of grief or a lot of loss, like all the heavy, heavy, heavy emotions, when all this freedom is coming, you're just more apt. It's like a habit to focus on what's being triggered versus all this light that's here, right? And so like glass half full, glass half empty people, right? It takes a lot of shift, but we can kind of teach ourselves to be like, okay, I'm feeling this right now, but I wonder what else is here. More light, more heart, more love, more space, more peace, more no oneness, more nothingness, more void. Because we're so focused on, the rock versus all the other things in the forest. And so I just want to share that of how we are each experiencing all this light and all this freedom is really, really, it's like similar and really different,
And I think what I want to add to that too is trauma, getting to trauma, most of the stuff for healing when it's deep trauma, it's like an onion, there are layers. And knowing that there are layers and knowing like it is going to be an ebb and a flow as you peel the layers away, I think the thing is to understand the journey and understand that it's going to be that there are going to be layers that come up and that you're going to have stuff triggered, but to, like what Amajam was saying, to be able to pull back from it and be able to be able to put it in perspective so that you can still keep yourself grounded as best that you can and know like, hey, this stuff's coming up again. Try to create as much space with it as you can, so that way you can, sometimes I guess what I'm trying to say is that understanding the greater journey sometimes helps give you that space so that you can deal with a specific layer that's coming up.
In trauma, like maybe your mind doesn't think it's trauma, like, oh, it's just this yuck, right? So that's what I want to say to you too. What is the yuck? The other thing that's helped me a lot with energy over the years is I practice taking the label off and just feeling it. So if you take the label of yuck, or you take the label of heaviness, or you take the label of energy, or you take all the labels off and just really be present with this consciousness or this energy. And you might have glimpses or moments of like, oh, that's what that is, or oh. But I would not beat yourself up. I know easier said than done. This is your phase, your process, and to honor this yuck experience as long as it takes. I know easier said than done, but
yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna go to Heather. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, loves.
Hello.
Hey there.
Oh my gosh. And thank you so much for mentioning that, because, as being on our path, and I don't really hear anybody that has, I feel it so intensely, like physically intense. I guess that's clear cognizance, but it feels like my skull's being ripped apart, and it's in every waking moment of my life. It feels like sometimes. So to hear that it's trauma, my head's bouncing around going, yep, it's trauma. And I'm like, really?
Right? Like, really? That's trauma?
Yeah. And it might be, again, it's buried, right?
Yeah.
And it's things attached to that trauma then magnify, right? But underneath.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you so much for mentioning that. I'll have to sit with it, because sometimes I can't sit with it and I'm knocking on the door going, hey, it's too intense right now. I can't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like to focus on it makes it even more.
So, when you're talking right now, Spirit is offering, we can approach things from different parts of our consciousness, or like, wait a minute, if I'm approaching it and it's too intense and it's too much, I know I can handle this. I've handled everything else.
Yeah.
Wait, I think I need different part of me to approach it. So food for thought, I guess. And you know what you're saying too about like, we all have this habit in our own way of approaching our stuff. And it's like, how alive is that anymore? Too.
I mean, the approach.
Yeah. Like for me, I'll have something come up, let's say, and my very first split second is I'll look at it. And I've been doing that as long as I can remember. And then because of all this shift, like one of the things that's going on is like, I'd go to approach things in the same way, and I'm like it just feels like this door is closed, or like road closed. And yet I'm like, yeah, but I have no clue how to do it anyway different. And it's like, it happens in like everything I'm describing right now happens in 2 seconds, like a blink of an eye. And so when you're feeling, because as you're saying, like it's too much, I can hear Spirit being like, girl, like you can completely meet this. Like it's not too much. It's the part that's approaching it is overwhelmed. She can't do it. She can't do it.
Okay.
It's like you're not riding a tricycle anymore.
No, that's for damn sure.
And I think what's challenging too is like for our own experiences that we're having with ourselves, like, well, how do we know something is like we're not riding a tricycle anymore, like the road is closed, or like can't do it in the same way anymore, or how do we know? without self-inquiry, really,
Mhm.
right? And like, how do we even know when to use self-inquiry? Like, how do we even know something's not working? Because it can appear like it is.
Yeah.
Like, right? It's so
Yeah.
like, I remember I want to say it was like 2010 or something. It was this Mayan calendar deal
Mhm.
about 2012 and like all these things. And there was a scientist that I can't remember his name, that we had found that was talking about all these aspects of the Mayan calendar and how they were affecting, and it really resonated with us. And one of the things that he had said around 2012 ish was our like marionette strings from the divine or from like spirit are being cut, and we're on our own because we're ready. We're not left or abandoned, but it's like we don't need this kind of guidance anymore. We need our own now. And if we keep having the strings pulling, we'll never find our own, right? It's just like a little bird that needs to go fly out of the nest, right? Mommy's
Right.
still there, and so it reminds me like what you're saying about, well, if my cords were cut, let's say, but I didn't know that. Like my mind didn't be like, oh, look, here comes the big divine scissors cutting my links. I got to go figure this out on my own, right? I just think like self-inquiry is just know thyself, right? Know thyself, heal thyself. And like, how do you know something's not working, right?
Yeah.
It's hard.
I'm working on nothing is external. Nothing. That's fun.
Can I share one about that?
Oh yeah, please.
So I was working Ho'oponopono for a really long time, and one day Michael and I were in a store, and Ho'oponopono became like this natural thing for me. Like I just do it all the time without trying. And this is maybe 2 years into doing Ho'oponopono. And we're in the store, and there's a woman in front of me, and she puts ice cream on the conveyor belt or whatever. And the cashier was like, oh, there's no price on this. And it's a really small store. It's a small town. There's no price on this. Would you mind going to get the price? And the lady freaked out at the cashier person. And she was so entitled. And everyone behind me were all like, yikes. Like it was really, really intense. And I'm like, Ho'oponopono. So I was like, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. And all of a sudden, I was the entitled one. And I was like, I wasn't trying. Like it just happened. And in that moment, that's when I realized, like what you said, like nothing is outside of me. It was horrible.
Yeah.
It was so, I'm like, oh my God, I'm that entitled. And it wasn't like this idea of, oh, I'm entitled. It's like, oh no, I was entitled. And it was, it was hard. It was really, 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 really hard. But that was such a visceral experience of like, nothing is out there. It's all in me. And there, there is something out there. We have duality, right? We're on the phone now. This is a microphone and I'm a human. Duality. This is outside of me. But I think as we like awaken more and more, it's like, well, what does it really mean? Nothing is outside of me versus, well, this is, right?
Right. Right.
It becomes like out of these concepts, and it starts to become like we start living like what it really means,
Oh yeah. 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 Learning when you overstep your boundaries or you relinquish your that set boundary and you're like, okay, fine, let's just do it. And then, energies come in, they're like, well, you allowed them to overstep your boundaries. And I'm like, oh shit.
It's profound, man.
Yeah, it is. Well, I mean, the thing about it too is underneath a lot of that too is what you get back, what you said originally, which is this trauma. In most cases. Because that's the question. Well, I mean, the thing is why do you let these, why are these things in your space? Right? With the headache. I mean, because the thing is, it may not be so obvious. Sometimes it is, you have to kind of dig underneath the layers to it. So I think when you said that resonated with, I could feel the truth in that.
Thank you, loves.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to read Shireen's other part she said. So Shireen said, one specific is the fear of making decisions. I still feel the urgency of having to make a decision and the fears of making the wrong decisions. Mm-hmm.
I don't know anything about that.
It's like one of his biggest things. But wanting to know my truth. And I'm discovering I can just be still longer with the unknown, which is huge because if you have urgency, the urgency doesn't want to be still. So that's huge, right? I can just be still longer with the unknown and let myself not have to decide in the moment when I don't feel a peace either way. We had a kitty come to us and all the feels are coming up, Feels. I'm assuming you meant to say fears, but I'm not sure. And all the feels are coming up when trying to decide whether to keep him or share him with another family that will love him. It's like I'm being provided with new opportunities to choose anew and be loving and patient with myself, which allows more peace rather than frantic urgency. And the feels are still there too. So I'm assuming you meant fears. This is a wild ride. For me, I have we both have fear of making the wrong decision. And for me, it's like a spiritual fear. It's not fear of like getting the wrong detergent or something. It's not like a human fear because I've spent a lot of time with the same like thing that you're saying. And the urgency part, working with my trauma has really helped that too, of like what in me is feeling so urgent. And like I found like it's really layered for me of why I'm afraid to make the wrong decision. And I found a lot of it's on a spiritual level. It's not so much like human. What do you want to say?
I don't know. I'll be honest. I mean, because I'm different than her that I do fear about in terms of material things, material choices, whether it's buying something or going somewhere to make sure that I want to, particularly as a material impact, to like make sure I make the wrong choice. I think the thing is that fear for me is I recognize what helps me with it is recognizing where that originates from in my body. And for me, it's very mental, and I feel the energy really what's concerned is in my brain. It's one thing if my gut is concerned. There's been situations where we are about to go into the store and my gut is like, I don't feel safe. Something feels off and we don't know why. And we could be on the walk to the store, and that's something that we've agreed to is like, if something feels off, we acknowledge it verbally and we literally just, no questions asked, we turn around and we leave.
That's different than that fear.
But that's different than this mental fear, because the mental fear is based on kind of how I grew up. And a lot of those things about like, having to make the perfect choice. Otherwise, there's going to be consequences. And so I guess the question is, where is that fear originating? Like if it's actually truly in your gut, truly in your knowing where your intuition's at, that's one thing. And that has a frequency to it. Again, back to the spiritual sommelier. So it's about really, identifying the origin, where physically in your body is it at? What are the qualities of it? What does it feel like? Is it fast and staccato? Is it smooth? Is it quiet? Like what are the qualities of that fear? Because when I'm in my mind and there's that mental fear, it's very much like a ping pong. It's bouncing around. It's a very high pitch. When we're out, like as example, like when we're going to the store and something off, my gut will tighten, and then I'll have that feel like something will tighten, which is expansiveness versus contraction, and something in my second and third chakra just contracts, and that's a whole different information than this being wondering or this contracting. That happens all the time, and I think the thing is, don't expect it to not necessarily do that, because it'll probably always do that, right?
Which will always do that?
Your mind's going to do what your mind does, right? But to really I think the thing is, again, is sometimes for me, and I was saying this last couple of times, which is to be able to name it. Hey, my mind is it's like a race car and it's going around or it's bouncing around like a pong game, right? So then you can name it and talk about it, even if to yourself. So that way you can, I find for me that helps me a lot in terms of create space between me and it. And then it's a matter of a choice about, you can acknowledge it, like, hey, my mind is going all over the place. And then it's like, hey, I choose, what does my gut say? I'm going to live down here. I'm going to live in my truth. What does my truth say? Right? Because that's a choice. We talk about that a lot, but it's really a choice. And it's about, again, using that discernment to recognize, instead of just mixing everything together, and it's just this chaos. And there are times when it is like you're feeling this chaos, and that's going to be, we're going through the tools of like, hey, is this chaos mine? Or changing your location, or
That's a
if you're
good
not
question.
safe.
Like, what part of the urgency is even yours?
Right.
I mean, some of it obviously, right? But or whatever it's sticking to is
any of it.
Yeah, is any of it versus like, well, something's going on of fear of making a decision, right? So maybe,
because a lot of times I'll find too, external energies will take your wounding, take your trauma, they'll take your issue, and they will expand that. They'll amplify it, so it's just that much worse. And that has a feeling to it. And that's when you start to feel this explosive kind of thing. Then you can really, like, it's one thing, like you're in a situation where you're physically, the house is burning. You can't spiritually sit there and be like, well, am I going to be okay? You get the hell out of the house, right? So obviously this is contextually important, situationally relevant to how you, but if you have a situation where there's no imminent danger and you're having this craziness, then you can start asking these questions like, wow, I feel this craziness, just name it. And then be able to be like, hey, is this all mine?
yeah, it's like we forget, right?
Yeah, that's a good place, because
like
then you can put the bags down and clear the stuff out. Then you get down to what's yours, and it just quiets the room so much. Then you're like, well, my mind's bouncing all around. Then you're like, hey, okay, I recognize that, I acknowledge that. What's my intuition? Like, where am I at? Where's my gut? Is my gut concerned? Is there something to deal with right now? What feels like the right decision, even though I might want this, Kitty, right? Emotionally, I want this, or I have this whole story about, well, if I do this, then this is going to happen. This is where the fine line of knowing what becomes a story. It's sometimes a really fine line where what is fact and what drifts off into story. Because that's a really fine line. And that's one where, again, being able to really catch yourself when you start to drift into story. I mean, I'm not saying it's bad to drift in story. I'm saying know that you're drifting in the story, because
you can't help it.
Because that's a situation where they're like, hey, I know what this feels true. All the rest of the stuff is story. So you just, again, you classify it accordingly, so that way you don't make decisions based on story. I don't recommend it anyway.
And I think it's helpful too to be like, when something's that like urgent, the urgency and the fear of making the wrong decision, right? It can feel so intense, and like we just can't feel the truth. And in that moment, we're like, I just want to know the truth, right? It's like we can ask ourselves, okay, what layer do I need to be aware of now of what's creating this, right? Because it's like a trauma, right? Or it's complete fear, right? And then
it can be, right? If it escalates, if it's one of those things where it is that sort of on a scale of 1 to 10.
Thank you, Shireen. Heather says that decrees have helped me significantly recently release and remove the cause, core, record, effect, and all memory of this back to source. Then send gratitude to those life lessons. Oh, Shireen said, I did mean feels, like all kinds of feelings rise up. Oh, I see. Thank you for correcting me. I think I do have a mindful, I'm just gonna make this better. I think I do have mindful material decisions, fears, but they seem to have a spiritual weight. I have so much grief coming up. Usually I fear my material decisions will be making spiritual impacts. Yes, I understand that one. So it feels so weighty. Sitting with what is story and the whole, how much of this is mine. So these are excellent for me to sit with. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think, the fear of if I make this decision, this spiritual impact, right, it's going to ripple effect. I think that's one of the parts where, like, that's true. Every single decision we make affects everybody, affects certain people. But then the ego and the mind come in and go, uh-oh, every decision I make affects everybody, right? And it's like maddening. Like the mind and the ego and wounding takes a spiritual truth and then freaks out about it and uses it, right? Yeah, I know that one too. Like sometimes I'm like, I wish I didn't know so much because my ego is taking it. You know, sometimes it's easier to like, well, I don't want to say that. It's not easier, but I get it, is what I'm saying. So I think we should start completing. What do you think?
Yeah.
I feel like there's just a little bit more to say. The other thing that I've been doing that's helpful for me is asking Saturn for assistance. Like, what are you wanting from me in my chart right now, Saturn? In a way that I may not like be conscious of, right? Or be aware of. And so I'm kind of like working with Saturn right now as a guide, if you will, to be like, well, what is it that my chart wants from me right now? How can I approach this consciously instead of unconsciously? Or so I just want to throw that out there too. And again, not giving my power away to Saturn, right? But it's like, you know, just asking, like, what might I be not seeing right now about the Saturn thing for me? And so I just want to throw that out there too. Let me just, I just want to sit for a second. And I feel like what needs to be said is, two things. So, I was feeling like a couple seconds ago, like Spirit had something to say to us. And so I feel like there are two levels of it. One is this image of people like running around going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And everyone is going in 5,000 different directions. And then the other part of that, which I'll talk about in a second, the other part of that is this awakening that we're going through. Let's just simplify it. It's massive awakening that we're all going through. The part that's running around, the part that's freaked out, the part that's scared, it's really normal. It's really okay. Like, it's just, I want to use the word normal. It's just really normal at this level that we are experiencing, and that each one of us will be experiencing those types of fears that are being triggered right now really differently. Like the themes are different, let's say, but the fear can be really similar. Like what scares you, what makes you run around in yourself is different than what scares me, makes me feel like I'm running around in myself. But I feel like what Spirit wants us to know is that type of reaction right now that can come out of nowhere, or that we're kind of dealing with maybe for an hour or however it can show up for us, is very, very, very normal. And if we normalize it, it can be helpful to be like, oh, this terror in me at this level is part of this whole thing. The other thing I feel like wants to be said is it's like such a quiet thing that I'm being shown. Like it's so subtle and profound at the same time, is to deeply honor your experience right now. So important, because it can be similar and completely different than someone else, right? And that each one of us are like a snake shedding its skin, and how we experience that because of what gets triggered in each one of us is really, really, really precise and really different, yet we're all shedding our skin together. And so honoring your process right now, honoring your experiences, honoring what's happening for you is really, really key, really more than ever, I could say, or differently. Yeah, that's what I want to share. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, I don't really. I mean, I think the thing is, in terms of normalizing that you're going to get freaked out, I think the thing is normalizing in the sense that you can create space from the freak out, that the freak outs are going to happen, but you can have space. I would say I would still caution against getting identified and stuck in the freak out.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's not what you're saying.
Well, kind of it is like, I mean, yes, we don't want to get identified in it, but being identified in it is really normal because it's so loud and so intense. But then, yes, how do you
create space from that?
Which is to me like normalizing it, going, oh, this is normal. Okay, phew.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you can like, versus like, because it can be like the fear inside of us can be so intense right now in ways that we don't understand. So I think normalizing it, knowing it's okay, and then, or however you could do it first, maybe you like.
Well, I guess all I'm saying is we're not advocating getting stuck in the whirlwind of the trauma, right? Yes, it happens, and knowing that's normal, that it comes up and that you can get stuck into it. The objective is to not stay stuck in it, right? Is to actually create space with, again, we've given many shows with tools with that at least, there's lots of people have different tools, but use have your tool belt, use what tools are appropriate to help you have space so that you can have space so you don't get sucked down the whirlwind, down the tornado.
And our identities in being identified in these things are even stronger now than ever because of the shedding the skin. So it's, it's a lot. I do want to share too, and because you brought up the fire ceremony thing, that this Friday, my group Power Healing that I'll be doing, I'm actually going to be doing a fire ceremony for the group Power Healing. So this week when I tuned into what wants to be offered, it's a fire ceremony. And so Spirit, because of Saturn doing its shift today, because of this deep endings and beginnings that we're going through, because of what we're experiencing, Spirit wants to do this. I'm calling it a spiritual fire ceremony. Because it's not physical, right? We're not going to be together physically doing it. And so there's this image of Spirit's going to create the fire for us, and then they're going to ask you to throw in everything you want to let go of and to honor your journey up to this very moment. And then as you're doing that, the fire will be partnering with all the parts of you that know on whole deeper levels beyond the mind of what's ready to let go, release, reconcile, heal, and complete from all lifetimes and all existence everywhere that you've incarnated. And so it's a really beautiful, sacred ceremony to help us honor where we are, to say goodbye, and to welcome the new. And I'm offering it as a donation, so please feel free to share this invitation with those you feel could benefit from this ceremony. And I'll be sending that email out tomorrow. So I'm excited for that. It feels so sacred and beautiful, and it's just a beautiful thing. So ready to be ending now?
Yeah.
I will end as I start with a big exhale. Thank you guys so much for all of everything you shared and for being with us and chatting with us. And there's no words, and yet it's all we got for now to communicate. So love you guys so much, and we'll see you in Tuesdays from now, my loves. And the YouTube this replay will be up tomorrow on Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern and on Living Your Awakening. And please share this show with those you feel would benefit from these conversations and tools. And we love you guys lots.
Thank you so much. Thanks for calling in, sharing your insights, sharing your questions. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's such an honor and vulnerable experience together. So thank you guys so much. All right, my loves. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.